we're fortunate to have Don here to help explain, give us an overview of what it is and why it's relevant. A little bit of background: Engage Energy and Industrial Consulting was founded in 2015. Don brings a unique ability to guide organizations through these large-scale transformation and operational excellence initiatives. Don is the primary architect behind Engage's innovative project implementation approach. And he is a passionate advocate for socially conscious and sustainable business processes. And I also understand he's a native Ohioan, native Buckeye. So welcome, Don. One more housekeeping item. Don has a presentation we're going to run through. We're going to save a lot of time for questions. I would ask that if you could put your questions in the chat room, I'll be able to facilitate those questions. We're generally going to keep the questions until the end, but if there's something that's really relevant for that slide, I may interject and interrupt Don, and if he's so inclined to accept that interruption. But with that, I'll turn it over to Don, and welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you to all the attendees, and thank you to the Ohio Oil and Gas Association for having us. I really appreciate it. We're going to start today. I'd like to walk you through our agenda. We're going to talk about sustainability and ESG, but we're going to talk about, what does it mean, why it matters, and for a lot of us, where to start. My goal is to provide some clear and simple definitions of key sustainability terms. I understand that the folks on this call may come from a variety of backgrounds. For some of you, these may be new concepts and new phrases. For others, you might already be in a company where this is becoming very ingrained, or you may even be in charge of leading that particular effort. So whatever your background is, I hope that you'll get a lot out of this session. And as Andrew said, please feel free to answer any questions. Please feel free to ask any questions that you have. Happy to answer. So as we go through the agenda, I'd like to start with, like I said, a very simple definition. That is, to put simply, sustainability is about meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. As we go forward in this, we talk in terms of sustainability a lot on the environmental side, and we will discuss that, but just as important is the social and governance. And I know for me and the business leaders that I speak with, if you don't have good governance, you don't get the other two. So we're going to spend a fair amount of time talking about that as well. So sustainability is organized around three drivers: environmental, social, and governance, ergo the acronym ESG. And ESG is used by asset managers and investors to evaluate overall corporate social responsibility. And, corporate social responsibility, that's a form of self-regulation, ensuring a company's actions have a positive impact on the environment. And right now, the ESG disclosures are voluntary. We feel that will be changing in the very near future. We're seeing those changes already in Europe and in other places, and it's becoming increasingly important as a risk management and financial management tool. And we will talk about that as well. So sustainability and ESG strategy is really becoming the price of admission. We call it, in many cases, these are just table stakes. So implementing a sustainability program on solid ESG principles, it's going to provide a tremendous opportunity for companies to show their commitment and communicate their actions for the benefit of your stakeholders and the marketplace. I like to put a little blurb in all of my presentations, is that, we believe sustainability is more than just going green. It's a deliberate and measurable way of conducting business. So why does ESG matter? I always like to say, if you really want to understand deeply how an industry trend or a new process or methodology is permeating the business world, follow the money. So ESG is increasingly becoming a driver in business due diligence. Those of you who are involved in deal making, perhaps on the private equity side, perhaps banking or law, you will already know this. Oftentimes when companies are being reviewed as a potential takeover target, they are often being reviewed as what are the current ESG procedures and policies that they have in place, and how are they handling this? It's also becoming a condition for accessing capital. Banks and lending institutions are requiring, in many cases, very transparent ESG statements. For their own benefit, they want to make sure that the companies that they are lending to and investing in are also following very strict sustainability and ESG guidelines. We're seeing this more in the debt market. I mentioned management discussions and analysis. When a company is audited by an accounting firm, typically there is a management letter that is written, and they make a discussions and analysis disclosure. And often cases, ESG is becoming a very large component of these disclosures. We've seen government embrace these sustainability efforts through incentives and subsidies. It's becoming a procurement requirement for many vendors. For those of us who respond to RFPs and RFQs, more and more the language has shifted, and they want to know, what are your policies in regard to ESG? I know earlier this year, for the first time, we submitted an RFP and we had to put a full write-up on what our ESG program is. So I think more and more you'll see that happening, especially those of us who serve larger public companies. Many of my clients are large publicly traded companies, and therefore I have to, and my company has to comply with their requirements and vendor requirements. This is seen as a risk mitigation strategy. It's certainly become a board of director level imperative. In many cases, you will have a board member who is solely focused on sustainability and ESG. Many public companies have hired or promoted to the position of a director of sustainability or a chief sustainability officer, but it is becoming not only a leadership position, but a very strategic position within the company itself. And we're going to talk about these next two later on, but consumers are demanding transparency, and the social justice issues are driving tremendous change in our marketplace, and we will touch on a number of these. And I think for the first time in regard to the changing consumer and social justice issues, for the first time in years, I don't think we've ever seen a time where CEOs were under so much pressure to actually stand up and speak on the issues that they feel important to their stakeholders, their employees, and their customers, whether it be something involving environmental or social justice issues, or diversity, ethnicity, and inclusion, and LGBTQ rights. All of these issues are becoming on the forefront of the CEO's agenda. So we're seeing seismic shifts in the marketplace. That's because the world is changing. Due to climate change and dramatic weather events, we're seeing huge shifts in the way that companies respond to these. If you are for instance, a regulated utility, which we do a lot of work in, emergency response and preparedness has become critical to those companies, whether it be from significant storm events, hurricanes, earthquakes, large forest fires. It is top of mind to those particular leaders. We're seeing huge shifts in buying behavior and consumer sentiment. It's also believed that, approximately 20 trillion is going to be put into ESG investments from this next generation of investors and the millennial generation. They're demanding transparency in the companies they choose to do business with, and they want to feel that they are associating themselves and their dollars with companies that have a positive impact on our environment and our lives. We've seen rapid improvements in technology, data analytics, AI, those types of things. We're getting better data, we're getting better research. We're certainly becoming much more robust in how we report and the analytics that we use to report on ESG. And then finally, the regulatory shifts. I think if you are in this particular industry like we are, you're seeing a tremendous amount of pressure from regulators. We have regulatory bodies promoting ESG disclosures, and we said this earlier, but I think shifting from voluntary to a mandated reporting requirement will happen very quickly, probably within the next year or so, especially under the current administration. I like to put up this chart because it kind of shows the differences in where companies are at this particular life cycle of sustainability and ESG. For many large market companies, and these are the definitions we use from a market cap perspective, but the large markets are often public or multinational, have multiple divisions, and they're highly complex. Right now, we're seeing those companies dedicate staffing to sustainability and ESG efforts. They may have a chief sustainability officer, or a director of environmental and sustainability. And this is really driven by the investor community and the financiers who invest their dollars in these large multinational companies. And these are the companies that are really setting the standards for what ESG will eventually become. In the middle and small markets, that's where we engage and we typically work in, but they're often privately held or small businesses. Sustainability is managed in-house through either their compliance department, EHS, perhaps legal. It's often driven by their customers, which could be those large market companies, and regulations. Middle market companies now are, they're exposed to sustainability. There's somewhat of a limited knowledge in what they're doing, but for the most part, they are also beginning active programs within their own business. Now, we haven't seen it really permeated through the smaller to lower market yet, but I think that will be driven mostly by what we call the value chain, or the fact that the small companies do business with the middle and the large market. And so they will inevitably have to step up their game in this regard. And that is the area where we think there is a tremendous amount of opportunity to grow and learn. And we hope that they will take advantage of all there is out there to bring themselves up to speed. I'd like to spend a little bit of time on some industry sectors where there are the most risk. From a risk perspective, the top 5 risk sectors are oil and gas, which is the sector and industry that we're all in, metals and mining, power generation, especially those in coal, refining, and chemicals. So from a ESG and sustainability perspective, this industry is, as everybody knows, is ground zero for sustainability and ESG focused efforts. Now, it is also ground zero for sustainability and ESG activism. So we're seeing a lot of pressure being put on this industry in particular. And I think what that has done is really made the companies within this industry will inevitably be the leaders of this new an emerging market of sustainability and ESG. The fact that we produce and distribute the primary modes and materials for production around the world. When you think of products and services, there is literally no product or service that doesn't use oil or gas in some way, shape, or form in their supply chain. From the clothes we wear to the cars we drive to the buildings we reside in, everything uses oil and gas. It is the biggest foundational building block of this world's economy. And therefore, I think this industry has not only a huge responsibility, but a huge opportunity to be on the forefront of this subject and to really set policy and directives from that perspective. Now, that could be debatable for many of you, but I truly think that, we're in one of the most important industries as well, and therefore, it gives us a very specific and keen opportunity to set the pace for the rest of the world. Environmental, we're going to start with each of the ESG acronyms, and we're just going to spend a little bit of time on each one. But environmental, this is your company's impact on energy consumption, water and effluents, biodiversity, emissions, greenhouse gases, and waste. Areas of interest in environmental include things like climate change, building and facilities management, environmental regulations and practice, preparedness, prevention, contingency plans, as I mentioned, weather events, and having emergency response plans. These are huge issues as it revolves around environmental. And for many of you, you may also have spill prevention, control, and countermeasure plans. This is just a few. There is a large laundry list of various environmental safety and health disclosures and regulations that you all comply with. And so, again, this is just meant to serve as some primary definitions for you. Part of environmental is also discussing your carbon footprint. And what is the carbon footprint? It's the total amount of greenhouse gases that are generated by our everyday actions. You will hear the term net zero a lot, and that refers to the balance between the amount of greenhouse gases produced versus the amount removed from the atmosphere. And net zero is achieved when the amount we add is no more than the amount taken away. It's that simple. But most importantly, we think at some point, whether it be this year, next year, or the next, your company will be asked this question, and that is, what is your plan to get to net zero? We actually feel that a phrase or a phrase similar to it may become one of those mandated responsibilities or those mandated requirements for you as a company to say, this is when we will be this is when we plan to be net zero. On the social side, this is your company's focus on employment regulations, health and safety, training and education. It's your contributions to the communities that you serve and that you work in. Many of these areas include things like community engagement. Those are, and also your philanthropic or community events that you're involved with, whether it be sponsoring, ball teams or providing funding to local parks or communities or school districts. It's all of those things and benefits you as an employer and you as a member of the community provide to that community. It also includes diversity, ethnicity, and inclusion, making sure that you have equitable hiring practices in place. Safety and security, wanting to make sure that you work and serve a company that provides for the welfare and well-being of its employees. This also means talent attraction and retention. And within that is, things like training, safety training, and providing, as we went through this pandemic, things like providing rules around masks or working from home and being flexible with your working conditions, especially as we, moved and we all lived through the pandemic and continue so. What I feel is really the most important piece of this in the ESG, which is the governance. These are the policies and management systems and decision support methodologies that your company put in place. These are compliance with laws and regulations. And like I said, without good governance, you don't get the other two. You don't get good environmental compliance and you don't get good social programs. It's the governance and the way that the leadership of your organization responds will dictate your culture and your contributions to ESG. So areas within governance include things like your corporate philosophies, your values, your mission, your vision, your corporate strategy. Like you said, this is becoming a board of director and CEO level imperative. You're seeing companies embrace this with hiring and promoting people into leadership positions who are responsible providing ESG and sustainability leadership. This is also your internal controls, your management system frameworks, and we're going to talk a little bit more about those frameworks as we go into later in the presentation. But this is also, your efforts towards regulatory compliance. I have had a number of folks that I've talked to say, well, we're already doing a lot of disclosures, whether it's to the federal government, whether it's to the state or local municipalities. Doesn't this seem to be just one more thing as a burden or a piece of overhead to put on our compliance and our legal staff? The answer is yes, but you are already doing all of this. But I think what the ESG reporting frameworks that we'll talk about here in just a minute really provide is a framework where you can really communicate all of your various efforts across social, across governance, across environmental, in one nice, neat package that can be communicated out to your stakeholders and constituents and the market itself. So in a sense, yes, in some ways, this does feel like a lot more work on top of work that you're already doing, but I think it's all being done for the right reason. Now, there might be debate on that. However, at the end of the day, it kind of doesn't matter. The horse has kind of left the stable in regard to ESG. This is something that is not a fleeting issue. This will continue to drive our economy. It's going to continue to drive the way we work with each other and the way we report. There's tremendous public pressure. I think for most of us, you can't pick up a newspaper, a magazine, see a news article on the web that doesn't refer in some way, shape, or form to ESG or sustainability. The one gentleman at the bottom of the page, Larry Fink from BlackRock, has been one of the most vocal proponents of ESG disclosures. And he also leads one of the largest money management firms and asset management firms in the country. So when a company like BlackRock sneezes, everybody gets a cold. And so it's important that we all understand what's being asked of the community. I really strongly recommend that you educate yourself as much as possible, and do like all of us do, and that's read as much as you can on this particular subject. So there have been some significant regulatory changes recently. As soon as the Biden administration took office, they immediately began making changes to the regulatory landscape. In its first few days of office, Biden signed two new executive orders. The first was re-entering the Paris Climate Accord. There was also two executive orders, one called Protecting Public Health and the Environment and Restoring Science to Tackle the Climate Crisis. The second was Tackling Climate Crisis at Home and Abroad. These were broad brush policy initiatives to put sustainability and ESG on the forefront of policy making. Housed within the EPA are now 2 new councils to provide and prioritize environmental justice. That's the White House Environmental Justice Interagency Council and the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, both mandated to begin setting policy for sustainability and ESG disclosures. And I think I said this earlier, but we believe this self-regulation will eventually give way to mandated compliance and disclosure requirements. And we think that will happen sooner than later. We talked about management systems earlier, but I do want to talk about some of the reporting frameworks that are out there and what they are. So an ESG reporting framework is really a tool to use to structure and report out on the various ESG components within your program. Probably the 2 largest reporting frameworks and most used across various industries are the Global Reporting Initiative, or GRI, and SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. Now, for industries like oil and gas, the International Petroleum Industry and American Petroleum Institute, API, they have been working together with the International Association of Oil and Gas Producers and have come up with a very similar compliance reporting tool. I have used all 3 of these, and they're very similar in the way they are structured and the questions they ask. But more than anything, I would recommend that each of you go out to those websites, pull one of them up, and begin familiarizing yourself with how they're structured, what are the questions that they ask, and also look at the specific formulas that are used within a particular reporting or disclosure point in each of these disclosure documents. There's, you know, for geeks like me, they're very fascinating, but it gives you a clear roadmap on how you would structure your own information and how you would go about reporting that. And if you like, you know, feel free to email me after this, and I would be happy to supply you copies of these. Like I said, most of them are free and they are available on the web. But in any event, if you'd like one, don't hesitate to reach out. I'll be happy to provide you examples. For many, especially the publicly traded companies, I think one of the most important drivers of ESG and sustainability are actually the rating agencies and what is happening with those. And so the rating agencies, they function to assess the credit risk of a company's exposure to financially relevant ESG risks. So companies like Bloomberg, Dow Jones, Standard & Poor's, Thomson Reuters, they all have begun their own ESG research functions, as well as reporting functions, and publicly disclose their ratings for public companies and in the public domain and in the marketplace. So if you think about it, if you are a company who needs constant access to capital, revolving lines of credit, things like that to help manage the financial stability of your company, this becomes increasingly important. And like I said, if you really want to know about where the trends in an industry are going, follow the money. And again, this is one of those key areas where it's important to pay attention to what's happening with rating agencies and whether or not your company is involved and being measured as part of this. there are a number of policy considerations that are that you will inevitably, as companies, be exposed to. And so, more than anything, companies should have ESG tailored disclaimers in their regulatory filings. Companies must ensure that their ESG reports are not materially false or misleading. You've heard, for many of you, you may have heard the term greenwashing, and that is companies that are potentially making false statements about what they're doing or what they're not doing in regard to the environment or ESG disclosures. It is important that if you put this out in the public domain, you will be held liable for its accuracy. So it is important that directors have a policy to cover ESG reporting in place. They need to be effectively implemented and modified if potential weaknesses are identified. And directors should understand how ESG reporting frameworks and which are the most suited for their respective companies. Now, reporting frameworks like SASB, like GRI, also have industry-specific reporting disclosures. And I would recommend, like I said, again, if this is something you're extremely interested in, go to their websites and look at the industry-specific frameworks as well. And so it's also important that the key decision makers within these companies identify a range of stakeholders impacted by and impacting your company. So understand who those stakeholders are and really understand who your audience is for these types of disclosures. So there are some advisory issues as well. If you're a company like mine, it's a consulting firm or perhaps a law firm or a public accounting firm, you'll know that there's been increased scrutiny of companies' business and operating models, their carbon footprint, and their contribution to climate change. There is also significant liability from making ESG disclosures that are materially misleading or false. So as I said before, it's very important that you make clear, transparent, and accurate statements when in this regard. It's much better to say, we don't currently have a program in place than it is to falsify your efforts or to mislead the marketplace. And non-disclosure of ESG information may open companies to additional risk and litigation. So when we say that it's currently voluntary, it in fact is, but we do believe that mandated compliance reporting will be coming in the very near future. So as we continue on here, it's really, how do you start your own sustainability journey? And I'll just go through each one of these briefly, and then I'd really like to open it up for questions and just a conversation with you about this. But you start by conducting a materiality assessment. So what is that? That is where I recommend that folks take a disclosure like GRI or SASB and work backwards from it. So if you know what's being asked of you as in regard to reporting, look at what those particular frameworks ask. And again, work backwards. Determine in your own company where certain policies or processes lie. Make a laundry list of where those are. And then, you could use a company like ours or any others to do a greenhouse gas inventory perhaps, or a more broad risk-based assessment. But in any event, you need to get a base level of understanding of where your current company is in regard to ESG. You want to identify the proper reporting frameworks. It's important that leadership expectations are aligned with this. For instance, if there is a deep-seated goal or from leadership that this be embedded into your own strategy, practices, and you want to implement a program, it is important that leadership gets aligned, that you are not sending mixed messages to the marketplace. That is extremely important. And it's also important that you align your expectations with those expectations of your customers and other stakeholders. And so from there, you can certainly determine what gaps you have in your programs and policies. And then finally, we wholeheartedly recommend that your company produce an annual sustainability report. If you go online to any number of large public companies, you will begin to see annual sustainability reports being a huge part of their annual disclosures. So much like a company does an annual financial report, they're creating annual sustainability reports. And in many cases, that also gets a very prominent place on a company's website, as well as their communications out to shareholders and other stakeholders. But I think probably most important is to make sure your company is telling your story. In other words, what are you doing as it relates to sustainability? What kind of culture are you building? What are the things that you do in your own communities and marketplace to really bolster your presence in the community, and more, what type of corporate citizen are you being in the community? So these are all important things. And like I said, this is just a very high level approach to how you get started with those 6 simple steps. But before we go on to questions, I would like to direct you to maybe a little bit of a case study. Because you're in the oil and gas sector, and it's, like I said, it's really ground zero. I provided a link in the presentation that you can go to see one of our current clients, Deep Well Services, which is involved in providing hydraulic completions or snubbing for long lateral multi-well completions. They have really embraced sustainability and ESG. I think it's important to look at companies like this because they're in your industry, they understand very well the marketplace, and they are using their own voice to set the tone and their own messaging and not letting somebody do it for them. And so I would just recommend that you take time out, take a look at that as a good example. And of course, there's some other great examples, and I would start with some of the larger E&P companies out there, especially the publicly traded ones. So with that, Andrew and team, I'd love to open it up to questions. I hope I didn't go through that too fast. I know it's kind of a little awkward that we're still not live, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Don. That was really helpful overview of ESG and everything that's out there. Help give some context to some of these terms and that we keep hearing. I have a few questions already from folks that are on the line. Thought we would just start there with I guess the one question that's probably on everybody's mind, and probably get this often: how much does it cost, right? What is the addition? And I'm sure it depends in a lot of cases, like anything. But when you're taught, what you put out there was a lot. Right? There's a lot of different standards. It seems there's a lot of different ways one company could produce this information. You have a range of companies on our membership. Everybody from the mom and pop shop that has a handful of wells, or a small service company, into the big multinationals that are going to have different stakeholders, different things to report. So what is the range of putting something like this together?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there are the large public companies who have entire staffs completely devoted to this. They may also use third-party whether it be consultants or attorneys or different types of professional services firms to help them put this together. And it can get quite expensive. From a pure cost perspective, you're talking about, in many cases, it could be well above 7 figures a year just spending on this, especially if you're a Chevron or an Exxon or somebody like that. To do a full-blown, kind of materiality assessment and then do an annual report, those could range anywhere from, say, 25,000 to 250,000. It depends on the size and the scope that you're trying to tackle. But even for those mom and pop companies that you mentioned, and it could be, a company that might have, 10 million or under. And sometimes that's not so much a mom and pop company, but that's, a nice size organization. You might be spending the equivalent of a person's salary just on providing frameworks for disclosure, but I would always recommend at least having some high level policy statement or a philosophy or mission statement as it relates to your beliefs around ESG. I hate to put numbers on anything because for every company it's going to be different, but that can be done relatively inexpensively. But it's just making sure that you understand what it is you want to achieve in regard to sustainability and ESG.
That makes sense. I mean, there's a lot to it. Obviously, it's not really a fair
for
question. Sure. That's on everybody's mind. What is the additional cost?
Well, and it should be. I mean, because you're already spending a significant amount on regulatory disclosures. Many of these companies within your organization certainly have, external affairs people who work at the state and federal levels on setting policy, and in many cases, trying to influence policy through lobbying and other means. So it's a very valid question for sure.
And considering the different resource implications that this project would have, how would you, when you're looking for creative ways to kind of manage all those different resources, do you have any suggestions on how one could maximize the credit from stakeholders and customers? So your partners, is there any way to kind of use their accolades, their stories, and incorporate that into some sort of report or a message?
Absolutely. I think that many of, for instance, if you're a company that services a large E&P company, for instance, it is. I'll give you the example of Deepwell. For instance, they're really trying to embrace technology to get on-site and off-site quicker, thereby reducing the overall carbon footprint, thereby reducing the carbon footprint of their customer. So when the customer saves money, resources, time, and energy because a vendor did something faster, better, cheaper, and more efficient, that rolls up into their bottom line, for instance, from a financial perspective. But it also improves their overall sustainability and their carbon footprint. And there are a number of companies that have really embraced technology. Remote monitoring devices, getting on and sharing data among not only for themselves, but for the benefit of their customers. And that's extremely important.
When you're saying sharing data, what do you mean by that? Can you explain? Is it sharing with who, and what are some
sharing, for instance, sharing your operating data with the company that has hired you to do business. In other words, they want to know how efficient you're being. You're trying to measure it for your own benefit, but also sharing that information with your customers can be very important because they may have ideas for you to help as well. Now, for many of them, it's kind of a double-edged sword. If you don't actively want to work yourself out of a job or something like that. But I think it is important that you're transparent, that they know that, whether you're using, for instance, a diesel powered generator versus an electric generator, those types of things, because inevitably it will be important as they report their, for instance, their greenhouse gas emissions and things like that.
That makes sense to me. Earlier, you had a couple of slides. We talked a little about the regulations piece, and there's a lot of regulatory agencies out there. There's a lot of different levels that these things we could see them at. But I think you were referencing the regulations, some of them applicable to publicly traded companies that may come out. But what are you saying? What other regulatory bodies should we be looking out for?
The DOE for sure. The DOE for sure. For many industries, Department of Transportation as well. Like you said, we do a lot of work with on the utility side with FERC and NERC and the reliability entities that provide the critical infrastructure protection regulations, the SIP program. And so all of those are very important. And then of course, you have any number of regulatory agencies that oversee the operations of oil and gas companies. And so it's important that you educate yourself on what those regulations are, because they are changing, if you're a small company and you don't have you don't have a in-house counsel, or you don't have a regulatory affairs person or something like that, it is important that you do what you can to educate yourself, because these things are changing, and the last thing you want to do is get into trouble for not knowing, because of you just weren't exposed to something. Unfortunately, that doesn't hold up when the fines come down.
We have a few more minutes left. If folks want to submit any additional questions, just send them to me. I have a couple more. I think just go to my list here. We covered a lot of ground, so I have to give it to you there. Also on the regulatory piece, it came up in two different contexts in your presentation. You talked about the environmental piece and with respect to the governance. When we're looking at regulations, is there a way to, is it quantification of the effectiveness of the regulation, or is it something of the company's compliance with the regulations? What are you seeing?
Well, that's a good question, because I think effectiveness of certain regulatory requirements is always one of those things that's left up to debate, whether it's effective or not, whether it's enforceable or not. And but I think the most important thing is the spirit in which you as a company work to comply with those requirements. And as much as you can, I would say get clarification from the regulatory bodies. If there's something in there that you feel could be a material impact to you as a company, but you don't quite understand how, I would certainly recommend reaching out. Now, there are those that say, well, as soon as I do that, I open myself up to scrutiny. Perhaps. I can understand how one might feel that way, but I think it's better to be safe than sorry in these regards.
So when we're looking at, and I guess let me focus that question a little bit differently. When we're talking about the environmental regulations, so say air emissions, you have some states that have air regulations. So some, and the federal government's coming out with, we expect to see a new EPA regulation soon. And part of the regulatory development generally is, well, this, by putting in these regulations, you'll save X tons per year of contaminants or of emissions. And is that the piece that they're looking for that you're seeing, or is it the actual compliance with your company's record with complying the regulation? So if you're meeting your state's regulation, and you can promote that piece, and maybe it's both. It's probably both, because you have the environmental and the governance
It is both.
piece.
I think the tough part comes in as a company. Do you have the infrastructure and the tools to actually measure and monitor those types of things? That's one of the key questions. And then is, what is the proper reporting framework or proper methodology to then report those particular indicators? And then how is the agency itself using that information? Is it simply as a means of gathering information, or is it being as a means of levying punitive, damages on someone? So in a sense, it's all a risk-based conversation. But it is one of those necessary things that when new regulations are put in place, you got to first understand, hey, how, what does compliance mean? How can we ensure that we are compliant? And then how can we prove our compliance to that?
Here's a probably not a fair question to ask. It's going to be pretty tough I think to answer, but it's something that's relevant. So I want to raise it. We're constantly, we saw a ton of standards that are out there. There's ones that may end up being like favorites. There's different goals that we're seeing with the Paris Accord, with the upcoming climate summit, different things folks are talking about, different standards. How do you avoid getting left behind by the constantly moving end zones?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'll say this. I mean, if you look ahead, it's very difficult because within let's just take the administration, for instance, the Biden administration. Day one, they signed in, they reversed some of Trump's actions, so if you're a large company that doesn't plan, you have to make capital decisions, you have to make budgeting decisions in a very, maybe you're making plans 5-10 years ahead, because some of these large facilities or these assets take years to build, right? And so it for many, it may feel like just a constant whipsaw of changing regulations, or changing sentiment from this to that. There's no easy answer to it, and the tough part for a company is you got to live through it and work through it. But I think the overall trajectory, regardless of the current administration or the various administrations that are in place, is that everything is going to be moving to a more a removal of fossil fuels and an adoption of some other form of technology. Right now, one of the primary issues is that, are we moving away too fast? And what is the disruption to the global supply chains? And we're going to see a little bit of that come to fruition this winter, I think, especially in Europe and Eastern Europe and those types of countries. But I don't know if I have the right, the answer that, the person asking the question has, but it's just something that I think you really have to live through. But I would say this: if you're just starting this, I would pick one of the predominantly or most widely used reporting frameworks like a GRI or SASB as your anchor, and then continue to go with that. You may choose a second one to report against, and maybe it's a little more industry specific, but at least that way you as a company are being consistent when perhaps maybe other parts of the market are not yet.
That's good perspective. I think we have companies have a lot to consider here. We're just about the end of our time here, but I want to thank you again, Don, for your time here. Slides are going to be made available to everyone on the call. If there's additional information that you questions you have as a follow-up, I believe they can reach out to you as well, Don.
Absolutely, and like I said, I'd be happy to share. We keep a library of those various disclosure documents and things like that. So if anybody would like a copy, I'm more than happy to forward that along. Feel free to. I'm fully available to answer any questions that you might have, or like I said, I would imagine the folks in your audience, it runs the gamut on their experience level with this. So for some, this could have been a little overwhelming. For others, it could have been, okay, thank you, Captain Obvious, but you never know. But I just want to make sure that they know they can reach out anytime. So.
Yeah, and again, we're to that point, we're looking for to you members in terms of if you're ready for the next level of this, if it'd be helpful to have a future webinar with to go in more in depth for exploring more of these issues in further detail. We can certainly set something like that up. Just feel free to reach out. And with that concludes our webinar on behalf of the association. Thank you, Donald. Thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, the Ohio Oil and Gas Association, and thank you to everyone who attended. Much appreciated.
Thanks.
Thank you.